All right. The paucity of information in the Gospels and the special pleading is at times quite aggravating. A number of sayings of Jesus are extremely doubtful, and it is uncertain with others what is their correct context. Some of them were coined in answer to later adverse criticisms like, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law," and "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth." When we seek to go further back, the problem is harder because we do not know what was going on inside the Nazarene community in those days, what internal controversies there were, what disagreements between individuals, what things about Jesus and those associated with him were altered or suppressed. The authors of the Gospels must bear the responsibility for changes they made themselves, but they cannot be blamed for obscurities inherent in their sources. Indeed, we must be grateful to them that frequently they simply reproduced what they found, warts and all. But we are still surprised at certain of the things they did not appear to know about, and some which they left without any explanation. It is curious that the synoptic tradition has little information about Joseph of Arimathea, but none at all about Nicodemus. And why do we not hear more about Joseph of Arimathea, who comes into the Passion story abruptly and almost immediately disappears without a trace? It is also curious that the synoptic tradition knows about Martha and her sister Mary, but not about their brother Lazarus. What relationship to them, if any, was Simon the leper at Bethany? We may wonder, too, why there was nothing in any of the sources about the life of Jesus before his baptism. Admittedly, the testimony book would have begun with the baptism because this was regarded as his inauguration as Messiah. But something might have been told us elsewhere. The Nazarene community at Jerusalem included the mother of Jesus and his brothers, from whom information was obtainable. We learn in the Bible of incidents in the boyhood of David. Why not about the Messiah, his descendant? Was there a deliberate silence for reasons of policy? Later generations of Christians did not see why there should be this hiatus, and they partly filled it in after their own fashion with extravagant tales. All we have in the Gospels is the one doubtful story contributed by Luke. There is another matter which strikes us as strange. When we read the fourth Gospel, we are impressed by the recollections of the unnamed disciple of events at some of which he was present, notably towards the end of this Gospel, his being at the Last Supper, his securing Peter's entry into the palace of the high priest, his presence at the cross, and his later accomplishment of Peter to the tomb. Why is there no mention of any of these things in the Synoptic Gospels? If Mark reflects the reminiscences of Peter, it would be natural that he should refer to them. It is difficult to avoid concluding that the omission in the Synoptic tradition of all knowledge of the mysterious disciple was intentional. Events of the highly dramatic character most important for the understanding of the life of Jesus receive no explanation, though the circumstances clearly call for one. Two instances will suffice, both relating to Passion Week. The first concerns the triumphal entry of Jesus in Jerusalem when he sent two disciples forward to Bethany to obtain an ass which they would find tethered at the entrance to the village. The second event took place later the same week when Jesus and his disciples were at Bethany. In this case, Jesus again sent two of his disciples. Luke says they were Peter and John, son of Zebedee, to follow a man with a water pot whom they would encounter at the gate of Jerusalem, who would lead them to the house where he would keep the Passover. These stories show Jesus making secret arrangements in advance with people whom obviously he trusted implicitly how did I get confused? Whom obviously he trusted implicitly, plans which were so vital that he had not disclosed them even to his closest disciples. They involve signs of recognition. The two who were dispatched by Jesus were furnished with agreed passwords in respect of an ass. The master needs him, and in the case of the owner of the house, which guest room am I to have to eat the Passover with my disciples? In the first incident, the emissaries were to expect to be challenged with the words, "What are you up to untying the ass?" In the second, they were to look out for a man with a water pot. The signals were clear on both sides, and everything went according to plan. The stories, intriguing as they are, with their cloak and dagger atmosphere, are straightforward and serve no theological purpose. We have no reason to doubt their truth. They throw important light on the behavior of Jesus. But it would seem as if the sources did not wish to disclose why Jesus had turned to others than the 12, to others than Peter, James, and John. Why could it not be told afterwards who was the owner of the ass at Bethany and the owner of the house at Jerusalem? The gospel mysteries are not confined to those which arise from very early ignorance, neglect, and possible concealment of material facts. They extend to the legendary features. For the most part, the evangelists did not create the legends, they inherited them. When we speak of legends, we are thinking of occurrences of miraculous and superhuman characters, such as the birth stories in Matthew and Luke, with which we have dealt already. We exclude the cures reputed to have been performed by Jesus, which, however exaggerated and multiplied, especially in the interest of the fulfillment of prophecy, do not call for any assumption that Jesus possessed supernatural powers. We may accept that he was a healer and could effect cures of certain complaints where there was cooperative faith. It was the normal thing in those days, both among Jews and Gentiles, to expect of sages and saints that they should exercise powers of healing, blessing, and cursing in a magical fashion. We are more concerned here with other cases of happening, like Jesus stilling the storm and walking on the water, the miraculous feeding of the multitude, and the abominable circumstances connected with the crucifixion. It may be said, of course, that such stories were simply the products of popular superstition, but some of them can be traced to the use of the primitive testimony book. The Nazareans' prophetic gnosis inevitably had the potential of inspiring the creation of events. Passages were found in the scriptures which seemed to demand that some experience of Jesus should realize them. The oracular interpretation of the scriptures in vogue among the Nazareans evidently delighted the early Christians, who proceeded to ransack the Greek Old Testament for texts to apply to Christ and Christianity. It became a kind of spiritual game. Gentile believers could go much further than Jews because they accepted the deity of Jesus. References of the Lord, Kairos, in the Greek Bible, and even to God, Theos, could be enlisted in the service of the Lord Christ, Kairos Christos. We have an early example in the first chapter of the Epistle to the Hebrews. For the most part, however, these exercises in oracle hunting would not get into the Gospels. Those would have the best chance which were related to an authentic incident. 3 stages would be involved. First, there would be the incident itself reported by tradition. Then the expositors would bring Old Testament oracles to bear on it to exhibit the messianic significance. Finally, the imagery of the oracles would be added to the tradition so as to invest the incident with miraculous features. Let us then look at the stories we have taken as examples. The basis of the story of Jesus stilling the storm is quite clear. He had been teaching all day from a boat moored at the edge of the Sea of Galilee and was very weary. He gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake, and as soon as it left the shore, he fell fast asleep. A tempest arose, but he was so exhausted that it failed to waken him. The boat began to ship water rapidly, and the anxious disciples roused him. Jesus rose, and as he did so, the storm subsided. What is this? The phenomenon is not uncommon at the Sea of Galilee, where the wind will suddenly come rushing through the adjacent gorges, lashing the calm waters of the lake to fury, and just as suddenly the tempest will die away. Since everything which happened to the Messiah must be meaningful, the expositors were reminded of many passages in the Psalms which spoke of the Lord in relation to storm and tempest. which stilleth the noise of the seas, the noise of their waves. The waters saw thee, O God, the waters saw thee, they were afraid. Thou rulest the raging of the seas, when the waves thereof arise, thou stillest them. Finally, the incident was embellished from the oracular texts. When Jesus is roused from his sleep, he rebukes the wind and bids the sea to be still. The fearful disciples asked themselves, what manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? A similar process has been at work with the story in Mark of Jesus walking on the water, which is elaborated in Matthew to include Peter also walking on the water, but sinking. Again, the basis is a storm on the lake. On this occasion, Jesus had told his disciples to cross over by boat while he went up into a mountain to pray. But the boat did not get far because the storm came up and they were forced inshore. As they were struggling with the oars, Jesus suddenly loomed up before them on the bank in the failing light of evening, and the superstitious fishermen momentarily took him for a malignant spirit supposed to haunt these parts. They were greatly relieved when he called to them, and wading into the shallows, he was taken aboard. He clambered into the boat. The wind subsided. When it was said that Jesus walked by the sea, this was easily converted to on the sea, since the Hebrew word al has both meanings. The oracles said of God, thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. And again, which treadeth upon the waves of the sea. The addition about Peter probably derived from teaching about the Lord's care of believers in peril. Save me, O God, for the waters are come unto my soul. I sink in deep mire where there is no standing. I am come into deep waters where the floods overflow me. He sent from above, he took me, he drew me out of the great waters. The incident emerged fortified by the oracles. Jesus walks on the water, and Peter cries to him, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come to thee on the water. He said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? A not dissimilar type of story development is represented by the feeding of the 5,000, of which there is another version in the feeding of the 4,000. Behind the story, as we now read it, there was no doubt an account of Jesus giving food to the hungry, and search was made to build up its significance. Oracles would be quoted like, can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? The people asked, and he brought quails and satisfied them with the bread of heaven. The prophet, like Moses, would perform miracles like Moses. There was another association also with the antitype Joseph, who had given corn to his brethren in time of famine. It is observable that the oracles were brought into relation with incidents in the life of Jesus, not only to illustrate the fulfillment of prophecy, but to provide sermon lessons. In our previous example, there is the teaching that the Lord will be with his people in time of tribulation, and that salvation depends on holding on to faith in him. Such sermonizing exposition may be detected in the feeding of the multitude, and the figures quoted will be allegorical. The 5 loaves may represent the 5-fold testimony book, the 2 fish, baptism, and the Eucharist, all signifying the gospel of which those who partook would be abundantly satisfied. The 12 baskets of surplus fragments will perhaps represent the further distribution of the gospel to all nations, the mandate given to the 12 apostles. The alternate version with 7 loaves and 7 baskets could bring in the 7 deacons, Acts 7, and their subsequent evangelical activities. With the last story, we wish to consider the strange circumstances connected with the crucifixion. We are more definitely in the area of Nazarene exposition. The fullest form of the story is found in Matthew 27. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. And the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose. For the rending of the veil of the temple, the gospel of the Hebrews stated that the lintel stone of immense size fell. We have also to note that ancient versions at Luke 23:48 makes the people who were present at the crucifixion cry, "Woe unto our sins, for the judgment and the end of Jerusalem is drawn nigh." What is being offered to us here is a solemn comparison between the giving of the old covenant at Sinai and the sealing of the new covenant in the blood of the Messiah. There is an associated comparison between the happenings at Sinai and those at Golgotha in relation to the day of judgment. The oracles enlisted to build up the account of the death of Jesus and reveal its messianic significance were inevitably more abundant than for any story connected with his life. Some of the testimonies are still preserved in the Gospels, but we are concerned with those which are not quoted and yet exercise a powerful influence. The following are a few specimens. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. Moses spoke, and God answered him by a voice, and the posts of the door of the temple moved at the voice of him who spoke, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone. Yet once, it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth, and I will fill this house with glory. Sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. A day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness. In the ancient Samaritan eschatology, we have a direct comparison of the events at Sinai with the day of judgment. All the signs and wonders which happened at Mount Sinai will be repeated on the day of requital, namely a day of turmoil and lightnings and heavy cloud, and a great fear and a mighty sound of a trumpet. And so will it be on the day of requital. The Lord will cover his faithful servants with the cloud of the Garden of Eden, while the wicked will be in darkness and anguish of soul. Then the bodies will revive and will come out of the earth. From this kind of thinking came the miraculous accompaniments of the crucifixion, seen by the early expositors as a repetition of the experiences at Sinai appropriate to the new covenant, and as the presage of the coming day of judgment. There was the darkness, the quaking of the earth, the voice that cried, the fear of the people, and the rising of the saints. In such cases as those we have looked at, and there are others, we find incidents made more meaningful and imaginative by teaching arising from Old Testament oracles, so that the events were invested with a legendary character when they were set down in the Gospels. Unless we are familiar with the early Christian methods of exposition and instruction, we might suppose that certain miraculous stories in the Gospels were pure invention. We have to understand that between the evangelists and the originally natural events, we have the intervening Christian prophets and teachers who, in Paul's list, come next after apostles. What began as edification ended as accepted fact. That's it.